It's not just an interim budget. I think it sounds like their final budget. There's no question that this is a government that has completely run out of ideas. They have essentially given us a whole bunch of rhetoric in what is already the smallest, the shortest budget speech on record, certainly since I started following budgets 15 years ago. And in this time, all they had was waffle, rhetoric, very vague generalities like confidence and hope and success and so on, but no details of any practical matter that actually will change the lives of Indians. On top of that, the omissions are startling. One word we never heard escape the finance minister's lips was the word unemployment. We are in a situation where she can talk about empowering youth, and yet 45.4% of youth are unemployed in this country today, according to CMIE data. Now, that is a record. You don't even admit it and see what you're going to do about it. She talks about FDI, foreign investment, going up. That's simply not true. Foreign investment from a peak of 3.6% under UPA has dropped to 1% of GDP today. And this in the same period that Vietnam's has gone up to 4.5% of GDP. So there is no question that there's very, very little to actually applaud the government on here. Look at number after number. She talked about Nari Shakti and female empowerment. We're looking at a situation where female labor force participation is declining alarmingly. She talked about the decrease in poverty and growth of the economy, but the truth is all the figures show that growth has been confined to the top half of the population, particularly the top 20% of the population, whereas the poor, the bottom 60%, have hardly grown at all, and in fact the very poor have suffered a severe depletion of income levels. We've heard 60%, government data, 60% of the MSMEs in this country have shut down in the last 3 years. Now, what are we going to do? Where are we going to employ these people? The entire 135 million people who were added to the economy since 2018, only 5 million formal jobs have been created, while 135 million, 13.5 crores, came into the economy of that age and they don't have work. I must say the government has been fecklessly irresponsible in claiming credit and patting itself on the back when these numbers are staring them in the face. Well, first of all, I'm sure they'll do some very good selective number calculation. But no one trusts their numbers. I mean, if you look at the Niti Aayog claim to have pulled 29 crore people out of poverty, they've completely changed all the baselines in order to be able to come up with a conclusion like this, and no economist takes them seriously. Whereas the fact that the UPA government in its 10 years actually did pull 140 million people, or 14 crores, out from below the poverty line is undisputed worldwide, because the parameters are well known, and the same base that was taken at the beginning was taken at the end to show the result. Whereas this government keeps changing the baseline to shoot their in fact, one of the greatest setbacks imposed on the Indian economy by this government is, for the first time in modern Indian history, our numbers are universally derided as unreliable. Whereas globally, India used to have very trusted statistics. That's no longer the case, thanks to the NDA government. So I'm sorry to say they can produce any number of white papers they like. We'll have counter numbers to give. And one of the things that I've been particularly disappointed by, which I think is worth pointing out, is how we've been doing on a different set of numbers, the various global indexes. We are 111th out of 125 countries in the 2023 Global Hunger Index. We are 161st out of 180 in the World Press Freedom Index. We are 126th out of 137 in the World Happiness Report 2023. We are 132nd out of 191 on the Human Development Index, and we have sunk to 131st on the Global Economic Freedom Index, which is monitoring the rule of law, government size, regulatory efficiency, open markets, and no tax terrorism, and so on. So in every yardstick, every one of these indexes, India has gone down under NDA rule. So we can also issue a white paper in response, showing all this. We can also show the percentage growth of the Sensex under Mr. Modi's government and under Mr. Manmohan Singh's government. And you can see the difference, who grew faster, who grew better, who grew larger. And more important, as I said, it's the people at the bottom of the pyramid. The UPA government can point to genuine changes in the levels of poverty in the country through accepted, universally measurable, transparent indicators. This government cannot. They can only fudge their public relations numbers. Look, I mean, I was very sort of amused or bemused by her saying that the trinity of demography, democracy, and diversity is going to be the big sort of calling card of India. Demography, we've seen the betrayal I've mentioned of the youth of this country. The demographic advantage we should have with so many bright young people has been completely shattered by unemployment, lack of skill development, grandiose promises never fulfilled. I can give you the exact percentages of the number of people who've been skilled, the percentage of people who've been skilled, and it's pathetically low. We're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4% of the targets being met when it comes to skill development, particularly of young people. You can't talk like so. Demography is a disaster. Democracy in a country where sadly the intimidation of the opposition has reached a new peak now with the arrest of a chief minister. We've also seen other chief ministers being threatened, and we've seen the intimidation of a large number of opposition leaders across the spaces, the democratic spaces in this country, and we've seen the record suspension of 146 opposition MPs in the last session. So what is the state of our democracy? And then diversity. I'm sorry to say this. Diversity was one of our great strengths and respected universally around the world. Today, pick up any newspaper abroad and all you read about is the assault on the minorities that proceeds unrelentingly across many parts of India, particularly northern India. Whether it's Christian churches being attacked at Christmas time, whether it's the repeated otherization of Muslims, whether it's bulldozers being unleashed somehow only against Muslim-owned homes and shops and so on, there is an ongoing assault on our diversity. So it rings very hollow when this government's finance minister hails these three elements: demography, which has been betrayed, democracy, which is being undermined, and diversity, which is being threatened.
Sir.
I think it's been overall extremely disappointing. We have seen certainly improvements in infrastructure, and the revolution that UPA began on the use of technology has grown very effectively into what is being called the India tech stack. On these two issues, I give the government credit for having continued, but many of the things they want to claim credit for as if they invented were all continuations of UPA projects. For example, what we used to call boringly direct benefit transfer, they call Jan Dhan. It sounds much better, but it's exactly the same thing, opening bank accounts for the poor. The problem is what percentage of their bank accounts are inoperative. At least when we opened accounts, it had real money in them and real people were collecting benefits. I'm told that the inoperative accounts of Jan Dhan are somewhere in the neighborhood of 60%, which is not exactly an encouraging number. So the government claims 51 crore Jan Dhan accounts have been created, but over 20% of them are inoperative as of this month, as of last month, December 23. And what is more, nearly half of the inoperative accounts belong to women, who are the ones whom the government claims most credit for actually empowering through these accounts. According to government figures, as of 6 December 23, out of the total of 10.34 crore inoperative accounts, 4.93 crore accounts belong to women. So I'm sorry to say that there are some real frustrations here with the government's claims in all these areas. But anyway, so on the plus points, I would say the continuation of some schemes using technology to bring benefits to people, and the infrastructure, the highways, the roads, the airports, the ports, they've all shown progress. But on the flip side, we have very poor marks on unemployment, which has hit record levels under this government. Youth unemployment is at an all-time high of 45.4%. You're looking at a tremendous rise in inequality in our society, where, though I'm not a fan of cliches, I will say the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer, particularly in the years since the disastrous demonetization of 2016, after which some 60% of all the MSMEs in the country shut down. And as a result of crores of MSMEs shutting down, poor people don't have the kind of work that was available to them. Very poor record in unemployment generally, with this very limited number of formal jobs being created in the economy. An emphasis on GDP growth may all be very well, but where is that GDP growth going? Who is benefiting from it? No real acknowledgement that the poor have been disproportionately suffering as the economy has so-called grown. And finally, you have a situation in which the inflation, particularly of consumption items that people actually eat, vegetables, fruits, that sort of thing, has been so shocking that at the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom 20% of the population, people are not able to afford to buy in the bazaar what they could buy a year or two ago. Now that is a lived reality of the ordinary Indian, which is why the government wants them to vote out of pride for a Ram Mandir, or out of pride for bashing Pakistan on Balakot, Pulwama, that kind of thing. That's what they did last time in 2019. This time it's going to be Ram Mandir, and no doubt the Abu Dhabi Mandir will be added to the mix. That, frankly, is not what governments are elected to do. Governments are elected to improve the lot of the common man and woman. Has this government done that? I would say on that particular yardstick, they get a failing grade. Well, in the South, they're not. The South people do tend to listen, and frankly, while no one is immune to appeals to national pride or religious pride and so on, they see it in context and they understand what they're voting for. Sadly, in the North, the experience has been different, and it would look like, despite the disastrous demonetization of 2016, which threw so many people out of work and caused so much of misery in ordinary households, it was enough to talk to the ordinary voter there about the assault in Pulwama and the response in Balakot, and talk about the 56-inch chest to stop the Pakistanis, and that was enough for them to actually vote against their own economic self-interest. It may now be that the BJP is banking on people once again saying, doesn't matter ki jeb mein paise nahi hai, but we will vote for Ram Mandir. Let's see if that works or not. I'm not prepared to concede the election until it's over. I want to bring this message to people that it's your own economic reality that ought to be uppermost in your mind. Picture Abhi Baki is absolutely the obvious line, number one. But number two, the votes can't be counted until they're cast. And the votes have to be cast when the time comes. There is still time for the opposition to get its act together. There is still time for people to let the sheen of the Ram Mandir and the other kinds of identity appeals wear off, and to confront their own economic reality. I do believe that ultimately the core message of the opposition ought to be, is your life any better after 10 years of this government because of things this government has done? When you voted for Mr. Modi in 2014 expecting to get a job, have you had a job created for you since? Ask people in what ways. Can you afford to buy at the market what you could buy at this time 2 years ago? Ask people to think in terms of why a government is there and what a government can do for them. And that will be the answer that the people of India will have a chance to give when the elections take place in the next few. Look, I would use very conventional words like disappointing, unequal, and I was struck by Mrs. Sitaraman trying to give a new definition to GDP, talking about governance and what I've forgotten what she said for D, development, and P for something else. I will tell you what I would say for GDP with this government. G is governmental intrusion and tax terrorism. D is demographic betrayal, particularly of our youth and women. And P is poverty,